I welcome you back to the fourth installment of Civil War Medicine and Iowa History. I apologize once again for the reassuringly low production values, as this is all done by me. Please like and follow my channel if you want to see other videos or watch future videos. This video is about the emergence of Iowa women leaders in the movement to supply medical aid to Iowa soldiers during the Civil War. Women at the time of the American Civil War did not have the right to vote. The male-run society of the Victorian era tried to confine women to the home and the family, making it difficult for them to lead in the public sphere on issues that they were passionate about. The Civil War would start to change this. In this video, I want to discuss how women leaders did manage, despite these disadvantages, to seize the moment and demand a place at the decision table on the issue of collecting and distributing much needed medical aid to Iowa soldiers in the Civil War, and how the women managed to shape the policy discussion to ensure that their choice of policy about how the aid that they collected would be distributed at the front to the Iowa soldiers and in the hospitals came about. However, this discussion begins at first by explaining how the governor of Iowa, Samuel J. Kirkwood, at the time, made a mistake underestimating them. There were three statewide organizations that emerged in Governor Kirkwood's term, as noted on my slide here. The first, the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society Network, emerged as a grassroots network of women's groups who formed at the town and church level across Iowa. The Keokuk Ladies Aid Society was among the very first of these societies to organize when it formally organized on June 1st of 1861. It grew out of early informal efforts in April and May of 1861 to meet the needs of sick and wounded soldiers convening on Keokuk, who answered the governor and president's call to raise the Iowa 1st Regiment to respond to the secessionist emergency after the fall of Fort Sumter. Those soldiers would be sent to Missouri to support the efforts to keep Missouri in the Union. Annie Wittenmyer, who had a background in philanthropy to support schooling for children in Keokuk, went out from the city to one of the early camps outside of Keokuk and saw that the growing army did not have the ability to provide sufficient medical aid for sick soldiers. In addition to Ms. Wittenmyer, other women leaders stepped forward, including the president of the society, Ms. Howell, who was the wife of the Keokuk City Gate editor, Keokuk's main newspaper, and Lucretia Knowles. The society early on hit upon a successful formula to address the problem of the lack of medical aid supplies. Ms. Wittenmyer accompanied the Iowa 2nd Regiment when it went south to Missouri later in 1861. She sent back reports and requests for medical aid based on her observations and discussions with the soldiers and with the officers of that regiment. And her requests were then published in a wide circulation of newspapers, and other ladies' aid societies, having read those articles, would forward the aid to the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society in Keokuk for Ms. Wittenmyer to pick up when she came back. And then she went back down to Missouri to where the Iowa 2nd was and distributed the aid herself at the regimental hospitals where these sick soldiers were, and distributed the needed supplies to the soldiers herself. And this was their formula for success, their policy, which was this idea of connecting the donor in Iowa with an Iowa soldier down at the front, with this guarantee that if you provided the aid, it would get passed on to an Iowa soldier. by Ms. Wittenmyer or other people working with the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society. While the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society, its network of women-led societies, was a classic ground-up organization, the second organization on my list, the Iowa Army State Sanitary Commission, was not. It was created by Governor Kirkwood in October of 1861. Because by October of 1861, it had become obvious to the governor and everyone else that the Union Army was not capable of providing sufficient medical aid to its newly raised regiments in the required quantities necessary. The governor, prior to October of 1861, had been consumed with other crises that year. He'd been called to raise volunteer regiments to respond to the secessionist crisis, and he needed to find money and resources to equip them because Iowa's stocks of muskets and other war supplies were extremely low. And he also then had to convene a special session of the legislature in September in order to pay for all the authorization, all the money he'd already spent, and also to authorize additional monies to spend. By October, the medical issue had become an issue that he couldn't really ignore anymore, and Governor Kirkwood turned to try and find a solution. Now he was well aware of the women-led organizations that had arisen, and he could have turned to the women to either lead the effort or to at least provide spaces on his commission, but he did not. As I had mentioned earlier, the Civil War would be changing, carving out a space for women to be able to lead and take leadership roles in the public sphere. But this is early in the Civil War, and we really haven't gotten far enough into our episode for me to really explain how the women managed to grab their place at the table, to get the place at the table they should have gotten from the very beginning. And instead, the governor is going to make a mistake here. He instead appointed a group of well-known men. One of them was the surgeon who was State Surgeon General, Dr. Hughes. And he was also led the state's medical college. He also would appoint 5 reverends. One of them was the bishop, head of the Episcopalian Church in Iowa, and the other one would be the head of the Catholic Church in Iowa, another bishop. And 2 Supreme Court justices, 2 bankers. One of those bankers was his brother-in-law, the Secretary of State, and 2 Democrats that supported the war, the Civil War on the side of the Union. They were called War Democrats, as opposed to the Copperheads that wanted to sue for peace and a division of the Union. One of the bankers, Hiram Price and Reverend A.J. Kynett, and several of these others had also played key roles in assisting the governor in solving some of his earlier crises that year. And so perhaps he leaned on them in this area as he had leaned on them in others. In his October 10th letter, he noted that around the state, societies to collect aid had been set up. He was happy to see that these societies had been established. So he liked the work that the emerging women leaders were doing. And he wanted this group of men to help encourage the establishment of other societies in other parts of Iowa where there weren't any. And he wanted to gather these pre-existing ones and the new ones that would be created and have this commission, the Iowa Army State Sanitary Commission, coordinate and work together with the idea of making the state organization, the local organization, subordinate to a larger national organization. This would be the U.S. Sanitary Commission, who had basically taken a role of gathering in locally collected supplies, concentrating them, and then distributing them on an as needed basis as that U.S. Sanitary Commission, the national organization, thought they would be needed, where they would be needed. The governor's political judgment in this area in both appointing this top-down management of the pre-existing system and also dictating how that aid would be gathered and distributed would not be taken well by the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society network. As we'll explore in this episode, the governor and his Iowa Army State Sanitary Commission failed to get the acceptance of both their role in leadership and also the policy goal of how that aid would be distributed. The governor would, within a year, accept that he had been incorrect in shutting out the pre-existing Keokuk Ladies Aid Society network. The legislature and the governor would pass a law in the fall of 1862, as we'll discuss, appointing Annie Wittenmyer as the first sanitary agent and creating the Iowa State Sanitary Commission, which would also authorize the governor to appoint other sanitary agents as he saw needed. This had the effect of elevating her on par with his commission. The rest of the video discusses the campaign that made that political change possible. So the policy tension arose out of how the aid would be collected and who would be doing the distribution, and also how would the networks in Iowa know what the troops needed. There were different policy ways to accomplish to answer both of those questions, and the root of the tension between the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society network and the Iowa State Army Sanitary Commission's way of managing the issue was that both of the two organizations had come up with different ways of solving that policy problem. See, the Iowa State Army Sanitary Commission viewed its main duty as working on the home front to collect supplies and send them to the U.S. Sanitary Commission. And the U.S. Sanitary Commission would keep them in a warehouse until they were needed, and then they'd be distributed. And they'd be distributed to a soldier, a Union soldier, without regard to where that soldier came from. Their theory was that people donated to the Union cause. As long as it went to a Union soldier, then all Union soldiers were covered. And when the governor did request the Iowa State Army Sanitary Commission to go out and check on conditions in the field, the commission would send agents to go out and ride circuit and check on the regiments. But typically, the reports that they got back were very superficial. The commissioner agents had a tendency to speak to the officers and didn't get down into the nitty-gritty. The Keokuk Ladies Aid Society approach was completely different, and it led mainly by Annie Wittenmyer. The Keokuk Ladies Aid Society assumed that people donated because they wanted to be sure that their donations made it to Iowan soldiers. They donated because their brothers, fathers, and sons were fighting, and they wanted to be sure that the assistance got to another Iowan soldier, maybe even their own father, son, or brother, or the father, son, or brother of someone that they knew who needed it. And this is because Iowa had recently emerged from an economic depression. Things were pretty tight. Also, with the closure of the Mississippi River, their main source for sending out um, their farm produce to sale was essentially cut off, and railroads, had only recently crossed the Mississippi. They didn't go throughout Iowa, and so being able to get your produce to market and actually make money had gotten much more difficult with the Civil War. Um, and in addition, Annie Wittenmyer and the people that went out with her from the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society, they didn't just speak to the officers. They did speak to the officers, but they spoke and spent time with the enlisted men in the hospital, and they tracked the needs and they observed the needs of the individual soldiers and and sent reports back. Ms. Wittenmyer had hit upon this kind of successful formula where when she followed the Second Iowa, as I had mentioned earlier, reporting back what was needed, collecting, having that word get out through its network, having the aid then sent to Keokuk. She would then pick it up, then go down through distribution and distribute it at the regimental level when she came by on visits. Also, while she was on those visits, she early on met key officers like General Grant, who she befriended, um, and his wife Julie. And these friendships and acquaintances that Mrs. Wittenmyer had were very key. They knew General Grant, General Sherman knew that she was there to distribute aid, saw the value, and they were willing to grant passes so that she could get to the lines and also move her goods up and down the river at very little or no cost on Army boats. And it was that formula, having these connections, having this kind of proven pattern that made her system work, and the personal touch. The personal touch meant that soldiers, brothers, and sons that received that aid would write to their families in Iowa, write to newspapers. And so Keokuk Ladies Aid Society and Annie Wittenmyer would get recognized for that effort, and that would lead to greater political power. To see that their policy way of seeing things would be given more credit than the Iowa State Army Sanitary Commission wanted to give at the very beginning of the war. After the governor appointed the commission in October of 1861, it did not take long for the commission and the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society to have their battle lines drawn, so to speak, over policy disputes and also the exclusion of early women leaders in this medical aid movement. Was predictable. The Keokuk Ladies Aid Society had first mover advantage, had an established, proven network that could collect supplies. The commission, shortly after it was created in October 25th of 1861, published a circular where it made it evident that it was coming after whatever it could get because it wanted to assert control at a state level. And it published an appeal in its circular called An Appeal to Women of Iowa in behalf of out sick and wounded soldiers, along with a standard constitution for creation of local groups at the town and village level. The undertone was that the commission was on the scene and was going to take charge at the state level. And the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society recognized that they were what the commission was trying to do, and quite frankly, they weren't going to go away without a fight. On November 18th and 19th, two back-to-back days, the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society responded. As I mentioned earlier, the president of the society was the wife of the editor of the Gate City, which was the main newspaper for Keokuk. And a column appeared on the 18th entitled "Soldiers and Society," which laid bare that the women who had organized and established their network were insulted that the governor had created a commission of paid male commissioners, with the exception of one of them. None of them had any experience whatsoever in this field and had excluded them. And so that the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society didn't feel that they were qualified. The author of this piece almost turned the honorific honorables into a curse word. Piece is rather compelling in its use of language in this area, and it takes the governor to task for basically creating a paid commission to replace or to attempt to replace a functioning organization led by volunteer women who were doing it all without pay and doing a good job, and recognized and had been recognized as doing a good job. And then to kind of show their work, on the 19th, Annie Wittenmyer published a 2-column report in the Gate City that detailed the efforts of the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society on all of its work in 1861, right? So all the work that it had done since its creation in the last 6 months, you know, all of her travel, all the detailing of the needs of the soldiers in the field. And so one has to see the two pieces as working together. The November 19th, 1861 report is, this is what we have done. We have done lots of stuff. We have provided valuable aid and a valuable service, and we're doing it for free. And the November 18th basically taking a shot at the recently created commission that as yet had done nothing and was formed up by people who were basically getting a paycheck with the assumption that they also wanted to get a political lift out of it, and as yet didn't have much to show for it. The Keokuk Ladies Aid Society was, through those two pieces, attempting then to ensure that their network would not leave them. And in December, the society would vote not to cooperate with the commission, which basically put their network of suppliers and donors kind of outside of the commissions, which really disrupted the commission and its corresponding agent, Reverend A.J. Kynett. And A.J. Kynett and the commission would, over the course of in the next several months, attempt to lash out and try and achieve some modicum of control. The commission would first try to do what one of its purposes was when it was organized in October of 1861, which was to get other commissions stood up and started at the local level, so local village and church aid commissions that would be feeder organizations to send donations to it. One of them that it set up was the Scott County one that we have discussed in earlier videos, which sent aid and volunteers after the battles of Fort Donelson and Shiloh. You can watch those videos if you are interested. And those efforts got really good press. And then on March 18th, in between those two battles, the commission published another circular calling on all aid societies, including the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society network to providing directions for how to each of the local aid societies to ship the aid directly to the commission. Meanwhile, Annie Wittenmyer and the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society hadn't given up on attempting to get official recognition from the governor and access to state funds. They thought that if they had access to state funds, they could then, not necessarily to pay themselves, salaries, but they could use those funds to increase their ability to distribute more aid. And around the time of this March circular, they learned that the governor was not really interested in providing them access to state funds, but was happy to help them in their other efforts, not with money, because money was kind of scarce, but he wouldn't stand in the way. Annie Wittenmyer wrote the governor in private with her assessment that the commission wasn't accomplishing anything, and it would not take long for that dispute to spill out again into the newspaper. Private communications did not move the governor. The Keokuk Ladies Aid Society published an annual report on April 15, 1862 in the Gate City, the main newspaper for Keokuk, Iowa. This report stretched over 3 columns and was quite comprehensive. The report began covering the origins of the society and their first efforts to distribute aid at the local level, and then the first trips by Ms. Annie Wittenmyer in September of 1861 when she went to visit the troops out in the field. The society revealed that their network of donors came from other ladies' aid society in the largest towns across Iowa, detailing the significant sums of money and also items that have been raised and donated over the year, and the distribution of the aid by Ms. Wittenmyer, who largely did her work at her own expense without the help of the state of Iowa. The Keokuk Ladies Aid Society had been on hand with needed medical supplies before and after key battles in early 1862, the Battle of Fort Donelson in February, the Battle of Pea Ridge in March, and the Battle of Shiloh in April. It detailed how the society was a learning organization adjusting its requests based on observations in the field and what the soldiers actually needed. The society explained the U.S. government shipped their supplies to the soldiers and to the front free of charge based on arrangements it had made. Despite all the society had accomplished, it admitted that it had received no aid from our state government, quote unquote, but we cannot but think that it will soon see the justice of granting us some appropriation from the public funds to assist us in carrying out our designs. Obviously, the article was an attempt to make a public appeal for appropriation funds from the state government to assist it in doing its expanded efforts, when its private communications with the governor hadn't been successful yet. The society also explained that they had hoped to unite with the commission, the governor's commission, after it had been formed as equals, but the commission had made no such offer. And when they didn't receive an offer to work as equals, the society decided to carry on as they had before the commission on their own. Having said all of that, the society then drops the hammer with some pretty scandalous news about the commission. The society reported that they had heard the commission had great quantities of stores in St. Louis lying unused. They also reported that the commission stores gathered in Iowa were being distributed to Union soldiers who were not from Iowa. While taking these shots, the society then disclaims in disingenuous language that they were not trying to be hurtful to the cause of collecting soldiers' aid and that they thought the commission meant well. It was clear that the society intended to air these details to force a public discussion about the commission's competency, crimp the commission's ability to collect donated supplies, and also force a discussion about leadership at the state level um, particularly on an equals basis with the commission. This article highlighting the failure to distribute supplies came at a really bad time for the commission. It was just days since the battle at Shiloh, the largest battle at that time in the Civil War. Many Iowa regiments had participated and suffered great losses. Iowan families at that time still did not know the fate of their loved ones because the wounded men were just starting to be evacuated when this article came out. Accordingly, the article was timed to create this kind of political impact to hopefully drive some change. The commission and its vocal corresponding secretary responded in basically two different ways. In early May, Reverend Kynett lobbied the governor for the appointment of Ira Gifford as a state agent in the field to coordinate the distribution of these supplies. Ira Gifford was a Republican elected clerk of court for Scott County, and he had already voluntarily gone on a couple of trips for the governor. Once after the Battle of Belmont in fall of 1861 and around November, and after the Battle of Fort Donelson in February of 1862. Ira was approved by the governor in early May, and he was sent to join a group of all-male volunteers that the commission had helped to send after the Battle of Shiloh. As the state agent, he was supposed to coordinate the delivery of supplies that were supposedly languishing in the warehouse in St. Louis and in other places. And the second thing that Reverend Kynett did to adjust this was to call for a statewide convention to create a sense of legitimacy for the Iowa Army State Sanitary Commission. Our run time is now about a half hour, so I've decided to break this episode into smaller portions. Next time, we will get together to discuss how Reverend Kynett and the Iowa Army State Sanitary Commission attempted to use a statewide convention to legitimate their attempt to take control over soldiers' aid across Iowa, and how the leaders in the Keokuk Ladies Aid Society and its network would respond and ultimately position themselves to get a seat at the table. So until then, and I look forward to seeing you soon, until then, we break for now.